Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Paddock Talk podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at every team's driver pairing and ranking them from 10th to 1st. As 7 of the 10 teams on the grid have brand new pairings, we're going to mainly be going off individual performance. However, for teams, such as Mercedes, who have had their pairing for quite a long time, we can apply context to them, how they work well together, and sort of maybe while those two individual drivers may not be great, because they work well together, that pairing is ranked highly. So let's just get straight into it. Taylor, who have you got for 10th?
So starting off with at the bottom with my lowest ranked 2021 driver pairing, I don't think I'll be alone in this selection, but I have gone for Haas. As Tom rightfully said, 7 of the 10 teams have elected to change their lineup for this season. However, only Haas have changed both their drivers by signing rookie drivers Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher. It's unsurprising they did this when you consider the struggles they went through last season, and they do look set to fare even worse than they did last year in 2021. There have been reports confirmed that they haven't been able to fire up the Ferrari engine until testing because the Ferrari engineers they need for the job can't visit the UK where their factory is based. And on the driver front, both Mazepin and Schumacher have proven in the past that they do take time to adapt to a series. Most notably in the 2019 Formula 2 Championship, Mazepin finished 18th while Schumacher finished 12th. However, a year on, Mazepin then came 5th while Schumacher went on to win the championship in an even more competitive field than the 2019 grid. With that in mind, it's safe to presume that both drivers won't pull out any significant results this year, and with Haas likely to be at the back anyway, it does seem quite an inspired decision to give Mazepin and Schumacher a year under little pressure so that they can come to grips with the world of F1 and hopefully be in a better position to attack the new regulations in 2022. This is definitely a transition year for Haas for both the team and their drivers, so I don't think there's any shame in placing them at the bottom of my list.
Yeah, I think you've covered most bases there. I think, they've got 2 rookies in the team for this year. I'd say it's definitely the worst lineup on the grid by some distance, I'd say. Schumacher's definitely talented, but as you've said, he's got a habit of taking a while to adapt. That's the same with Mazepin as well. I think in the future it could be a really good lineup, but at the moment, I think it's not that great. It's quite far off.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a reoccurring theme across all of us. It's the talent and potential is there in the lineup, but straight away out the blocks, I don't think they're going to be setting the world alight. It's not an insult to be placed 10th out of the 20 so-called best drivers in the world, but they're just that level behind of their preparation when you compare them to other rookies that have came up, and the odds are really heavily stacked against them. But I just don't really see anyone else that could probably be 10th place.
I think everything's been covered really. Obviously, Schumacher is slightly better than Mazepin, and they have actually been teammates before, way back in karting. Although for some reason Mazepin seemed to downplay that or something. But team dynamic wise, they'll probably get on fine. They're both young and hungry for success. But I think we're all in agreement there. Haas, the 10th place team. Now, what about coming in at 9th?
So next up, I've placed Williams, and this decision was quite intriguing because it was between them and Alfa Romeo, 2 of the only 3 teams to maintain their lineup from 2020. So that's quite a nice luxury to have. They're the only 2 teams, but other than Mercedes, to keep their lineup, so it gives us some background knowledge on how both teams' drivers operate together. If we start with George Russell, I think we all know how talented he is, and he has shown to this point all the hallmarks of being a future world champion. And a future Mercedes driver as well in the very near future. Over 1 lap, Russell's exceptional, and although at Williams he did show a proneness to an error on a Sunday, his deputy appearance in that Mercedes at the Sakhir Grand Prix definitely dispelled any doubts in his race day capabilities. However, this is a ranking based on driver pairings, and unfortunately for Williams, Nicholas Latifi does drag them down a fair bit in my estimations. It's understandable that it was his maiden season, and Russell is regarded as an elite talent. But if you struggle to outqualify your teammate even once throughout the season, that rings huge alarm bells for me. When you consider all the variables that can happen over a season, like if we take, for example, the Turkish Grand Prix, that was a weird qualifying session. And even when the likes of Leclerc dominated Vettel all season, Vettel was still in those tricky conditions, able to put 1 second between him and his teammate. The fact that Latifi couldn't even achieve the feat of qualifying Russell once, frankly, isn't good enough, and his junior record to boot was nothing spectacular either. I'll say more on Alfa Romeo shortly, but if we place both Russell and Latifi and Giovinazzi and Raikkonen in a hypothetical world where they are both identical cars over a season, I'd back Alfa Romeo to the Alfa Romeo lineup to outscore Williams. And that's why I've put Williams down in 9th.
I've also put Williams 9th, mainly due to the fact that Russell's, as you said before, he's an incredible talent, and he's up there with the Leclercs and Verstappen's on the grid. He's improving by every single race. I think we'll also see less of the errors that we saw in Imola and as well in Turkey when he crashed going into the pit lane. I think he's a huge asset to Williams, and I think this season we should see him score his first points for the Williams team. Latifi, I think he'll be much better this season. He's got a full season under his belt, and he did show pretty decent pace on a Sunday. So I'd expect him to keep peg with Russell on a Sunday, but I think on the Saturdays, Latifi's got absolutely zero chance to Russell.
I've also, surprisingly, well, maybe unsurprisingly, gone for Williams as well as being the 9th worst pairing on the grid. We've said all we have to say over Russell. Elite talent, improving every single race, as Joel said. He's just not got a teammate good enough, I think. Latifi, obviously, we know he's there as a pay driver. He's surprisingly able to match Russell some weekends, but we're still obviously behind him across the season. And even with a season under his belt, I don't really think there's going to be that much improvement from him. I think there's definitely better talent that could be in that seat, but obviously money is king in Formula One. But he's definitely not one of the worst drivers we've seen. But I just don't think that if Williams were to get further up the grid, they would probably have to replace him with someone better and younger.
Unlike you guys, I have gone for Alfa Romeo, and I think you might have actually persuaded me to maybe put Williams in 9th. But I'll stick with what I've got. I've gone for Alfa Romeo. For me, that pairing it just screams average. I mean, you've got a very old Raikkonen who sometimes can't be bothered to turn up, sometimes can, and you've got Giovinazzi who, when you look up average in the dictionary, he pops up. He had some potential. Maybe he's a bit underrated. For some reason, the F1 social media accounts like to hype up his opening laps, despite him qualifying last and starting on a set softer tyres than everyone else. That's an achievement, apparently. And I mean, it's just it was close between Williams and Alfa Romeo, but I just think if you put someone like Ilott in the Alfa, or I don't know, someone else, I just think it becomes much more exciting. And as a pair, they seem to get on pretty well. I mean, Raikkonen's much more chilled out now after coming back from Ferrari, and yeah, that's it. Obviously, I'll get into my Williams section next when you guys do your 8th placed, but that's what I have for Alfa Romeo. I have them in 9th. Now we'll go to Taylor. Who do you have in 8th?
So yeah, following on from you, I've actually put Alfa Romeo in 8th. Like Williams, Alfa Romeo have opted for consistency in 2021 by keeping hold of Raikkonen and Giovinazzi as a lineup. Raikkonen clearly has the motivation to race, even at 41, otherwise he wouldn't be here. I'm pretty sure he's tired of answering that question over the years. But he'd still be a valuable asset to any midfield team on the grid, especially one like Alfa Romeo, who were trailing at the back last year. He may not have the outright speed he once had in his prime, and on that front, there may be better candidates, like I can immediately think of Hulkenberg. But one thing you can't buy in F1 is the experience. Raikkonen's been long regarded as one of the best on the grid when it comes to offering feedback to the engineers, and that'll be invaluable for a team like Alfa Romeo, who are seeking to climb into that midfield battle this year. In the case of Giovinazzi, he is a really strange case to evaluate because in his earlier career, he did show a fair bit of promise. He finished second to Pierre Gasly in his only season in GP2. Gasly was in his second full season at that point, and I don't think that achievement ever received the adulation it perhaps should have. And his image was tainted heavily by that crash at the 2017 Chinese Grand Prix, not once, but twice on the main straight. Ferrari definitely did play a part in his career stalling. It was bemusing that in 2017 he didn't get a full-time drive, and instead Ferrari did allow a Mercedes-backed driver at the time in Pascal Wehrlein to get the seat. If Giovinazzi had got that full-time opportunity straight out of GP2, maybe his career would have panned out differently. But when he did finally get his chance in 2019, his career to date hasn't been anything special. In 2019 he only finished in the points on 4 occasions. He got outscored by 14 points to 43 by Raikkonen. And whatever you say about Kimi's experience and the fact that he does remain a solid midfield runner, Giovinazzi's not young himself. He's 27, and you would certainly expect at this point for him to establish himself further by now. His career's stagnated, and for that reason, I'm surprised he was retained. If I was Alfa Romeo, I would have taken the Haas approach and got somebody fresh in to have a year alongside Kimi Räikkönen before the regulation change. They could have made the most of having the experience of the Finn. Someone like Callum Ilott, Schwartzman probably wasn't ready, so Ilott was the best bet. So yeah, I'm surprised that Giovinazzi was retained, but the fact that he was clearly shows the dynamic between him and Räikkönen is good. It's a solid lineup, but as Tom said, it's a bit stale. Nothing's extraordinary about the pair, and for that reason, it can't be rated any higher in my eyes.
Yep. As well, I've also put Alfa Romeo in 8th. The reason I put Alfa Romeo above Williams is mainly down to Kimi Räikkönen. I mean, although his best days are quite a long way behind him, the experience he brings to Alfa Romeo is invaluable. And obviously, he always has that occasional spark of magic like we saw in Portimao last year. On the case of Giovinazzi, I was surprised he kept his seat for this season. I think Ilott probably should have been in that seat, for being honest. Although, obviously there's a good dynamic between himself and Raikkonen, so they might be seeking continuity. And hopefully he can get his act together, really, because there's definitely a good driver, but it's just hard to see him really make any progress. He's 27, as you said. He's really got to perform this season if he wants to keep his seat.
Likewise with Taylor and Joel, I've also put Alfa Romeo 8th. However, unlike Joel, my reason is not because of Kimi Räikkönen, mine's actually because of Antonio Giovinazzi. I think that Williams and Alfa Romeo are two very difficult driver pairings to rank because they're two very similar pairings. But I ranked Williams as worser because of the fact that they don't have the Giovinazzi. I think that the gap between Giovinazzi and Räikkönen is closer than the gap between Russell and Latifi, and we saw that last season with Alfa Romeo. I think they both finished on the same points, which, while they were very low point scores that they got, it's much better from Giovinazzi, actually, when you think about his debut season where he waited until Italy to get his first points after crashing out and having some bad luck on previous occasions. I think that this year, in his third year, he might be able to show people that he's actually really worthy of that seat. I think Ilott probably should have been in there ahead of him to partner Räikkönen, because even though Räikkönen, there is an argument that he probably should have retired in about 2013 or 2014, but he's invaluable to a team and for a rookie. Like, if I was a rookie driver, I'd want someone like Vettel, Raikkonen, or Hamilton alongside me because of their experience, their obvious talent as well. It's just invaluable for both team and driver.
So in 8th, that leaves me with Williams. And where I've differed from you guys is I just think Russell's ability is at a much higher level than Raikkonen and Giovinazzi, and also Latifi is not terrible. Taylor, you went on in him quite a lot, and I don't think he's as bad as you guys make out. Is he anything special? No. Is he ever going to win a world championship or even a race? No. But he did a solid job. I mean, if you consider the fact Russell beat Bottas pretty comprehensively, at least before the safety car, if you just take that pure same strategy standpoint, he beat Bottas, and Latifi had the same sort of gap to Russell than Bottas did. So I'm not saying Latifi could have also won the Sakir Grand Prix or put it on the front row, but I just think Latifi isn't as bad as you make out. As you guys mentioned, he's not bad on a Sunday. Saturday he needs improving, but yeah, he's not terrible, and I just think that Alfa Romeo lineup is there. It's just what it is. I do maybe agree that Giovinazzi could improve. He's got margin to improve in the future, and it is, like I say, it is very close between those two. But that's what I have in 8th, Williams. And Taylor, back to you. Who do you have in 7th?
So they finished 7th in the constructors last season, and they rank in that same position as my driver pairings, and that is AlphaTauri. So Pierre Gasly stays at the team, and I believe he is now partnered by the first F1 driver to be born this side of the millennium in Yuki Tsunoda. This lineup actually really excites me because I believe it has potential to do great things, and people are undermining how good it could become. Gasly's redemption obviously was one of the stories of last season, and nobody could have begrudged him that win at Monza. But aside from that moment, he was a model of consistency for AlphaTauri. While Kvyat was a bit up and down throughout the year, Gasly scored points in 10 of the 17 races. And now, for the first time in his career, he will take on the role of team leader. And then if you move on to Yuki Tsunoda, he's probably one of the most exciting prospects we've had enter F1 in terms of he comes into the sport at such a young age like Verstappen and with so little experience to boot as well. I certainly expect him to struggle initially, as rookies do, and his racecraft has occasionally let him down. And we saw that last year in F2. He had an incident with Ilott at Belgium that was a bit, yeah, very rookie-ish. But yeah, like as I said, you kind of expect that from him. But on the basis of his stall seasons and then Formula 3 and Formula 2, I think by the end of the year, we will start to see a new star emerge. And this lineup is very interesting also in the regard that both drivers are arguably fighting for their futures. Not in terms of their future in the sport, because I think they'll both go on to have long-lasting careers in F1. But Tsunoda was undoubtedly rushed into F1 this early because Red Bull and Helmut Marko were desperate to find their next graduate for the senior team, especially with the news about Max Verstappen's contract clause coming out. If Verstappen decides to leave at the end of this year or the end of next year, they are then scratching around for a young talent to go into their team and lead them. And Yuki Tsunoda probably is the next one in line. So that's why he is potentially in F1 this year and not doing another season of Formula 2. And on the case of Gasly, it's safe to say that he'll never make his way back into the Red Bull team. We saw with Kvyat in the past, Red Bull don't like to go back on previous options. And if they were going to take Gasly back, they would have taken him back for this year instead of opting for Sergio Perez. So while the partnership with AlphaTauri makes sense right now, it doesn't represent a long-term solution for either. Red Bull have stated that the aim for AlphaTauri is to now be regarded as a sister team rather than a junior team, but realistically, they always will remain a team that is different to the rest. In regard to that, their aim is to produce talent for graduation rather than win races. And Gasly, like all young drivers, that's what they want for the future. They want to be able to compete for wins, championships. AlphaTauri isn't that for Gasly, so he's kind of seeking an exit at the end of this year, and it'll be his job to perform to the same level as last season to get that. Alpine's probably the most likely destination for him, but in general, I'm a massive fan of this lineup. I think it will surprise a lot of people throughout the year, and it could have quite easily gone up one or two more places in my book.
For me, AlphaTauri is also in 7th. I mean, this lineup is a real dark horse, but it's also, for me, it's a bit of a no man's land. I'd say it's definitely better than the so-called Class C runners, but I'd also say it's some way off the rest of the midfield pack. Gasly's a really strong driver who's one of the best drivers of last season, and he's definitely going to be a key asset to AlphaTauri this season. On the other side of the garage, you've got a young rookie in Yuki Tsunoda who will be looking to make his mark. It also seems like they've got a really good dynamic in the team. I think Tsunoda, he's coming into the sport with a lot of momentum from Formula 2. He really impressed me last season. I'd expect them to really have a lot of strong results between them this season and may even make themselves further up than 7th.
In 7th place on my ranking, I've also gone with AlphaTauri. I think this is a team of two surprise packages. We have the surprise package of 2020 in Formula 1 with Gasly. His season, no one really would have, expected the win at Monza when it came to the position of having it. He was very consistent, as Taylor said, all across the season. He had standout performances, really mixing in with McLaren and Renault, which for AlphaTauri is a massive step in the right direction for them, because it means that they now have a bit more confidence as a team, as an organisation. Tsunoda definitely is, I think, the most exciting rookie out of the batch we've got coming in this year. In F2, he was sublime towards the end of the season, very rapid. Taylor mentioned he has the tendency to make small little errors that you would expect a rookie to make, but I think that's going to be not a trend, but it will probably happen in the first 5 or 6 races of his career. But once he gets past that little hurdle, I think he's going to be a mega asset for AlphaTauri. I'd argue he has been fast-tracked into F1 as well, but I think just the way his career has suddenly took a sharp turn for the better is only just going to help him going on into this season. And I think this lineup, while being 7th in the rankings, might actually surprise us.
To agree with you guys for 7th place. I've also gone for AlphaTauri, and you guys have got pretty much everything I think as you guys say, Tsunoda's an exciting talent. I think it's going to be a big, steep learning curve for him this year. His rise through the ranks. It's just been rapid. I mean, he only started single seaters about 4 years ago, and that was Japanese F4 or something ridiculous. And he's done one season in F3, one season in F2, and he's straight into F1. But I think he's got a good partner in Gasly. I think they're probably going to get on fine. They're both Gasly's still classed as a young driver, so I think they'll get on fine. And hopefully they can keep pushing AlphaTauri up into the higher midfield slots. But I think we've covered everything there. We've all got for AlphaTauri for the 7th. Taylor, who do you have for 6th?
Now, for 6th place, I have perhaps gone against the grain a bit by placing Aston Martin this low down. In truth, I probably would have ranked them one place higher, but for the purpose of being slightly different, I've gone for them in 6th. Regardless, it was very close between AlphaTauri, Aston Martin, and the team I am yet to reveal. But I can validate reasons as to why Aston Martin fell short. And to start with, I'm going to start with a perhaps weird comparison. But I compare this lineup strangely to a bag of jelly, like the jelly beans you get where you can either get a good one or a horrible tasting one. That's what the Aston Martin lineup reminds me of, because you never know what you're going to get with their two drivers. Starting with Lance Stroll, some weekends he can be absolutely on it, whether that be in the wet or the right. Mugello, he was absolutely flying in that race. Then others, like Abu Dhabi, he can be absolutely nowhere, and you won't notice him unless you see him on the timing screen. So even though he is still young, this is his 5th season now. He does need to start ironing out those inconsistencies. And although COVID did derail his 2020 season, we saw that Perez came back even stronger from that. So it will be good to see this year how Stroll can do if he does have a trouble-free year up against his new teammate. Talking of Sebastian Vettel and his move to Aston Martin, it is very rare that a 4-time world champion has anything to prove. But after a disastrous 2020, Vettel certainly has plenty of critics to try and downplay this year. Last season was undoubtedly his weakest performing year in terms of performance and results. So on that basis, you have to agree that Ferrari in hindsight made the right choice in letting him go. Nonetheless, I definitely think I don't think Vettel is finished by any stretch of the imagination. And in an environment that he feels at home, I believe we can start to see the real Vettel again. And the noises from the hierarchy at Aston Martin have been good in that regard. And the news about them getting the Mercedes rear suspension without the use of any tokens could be huge for both the team in terms of performance and Vettel with his rear dependency driving style. So the reason I placed this lineup ultimately in 6th and no higher is because I believe it's the most difficult to predict in regard to it has the biggest operating range. And that I mean that if you get a Vettel on top form, the one that won 4 world championships, and you get the Stroll that we saw in qualifying at Turkey, or the Stroll we saw in the race before the crash at Mugello, this could be the 4th best lineup on the grid. On the opposite hand, if we see the Vettel of 2020 that would make stupid little errors, like spinning out the start at Silverstone, and if we get the Stroll that was floundering down 10th at Abu Dhabi when the team needed him to really lead them and try and nab that 3rd place from McLaren, they could ultimately slip as low as 7th. So it's a tale of two halves with the Aston Martin lineup, and it'll be really interesting to see how they fare this year.
So it's different from me for 6. I've gone for Alpine. Now I think this Alpine lineup is really impressive on paper, but there's still some question marks for me regarding both drivers. Alonso's an extremely quick driver. It's no coincidence he's won 2 world championships, and he's always had a sort of notoriety of outdriving his machinery. So I'm quite curious to see how he gets on after being out of the sport for 2 years. But I'd imagine with the experience he's had over F1 in such a vast career, I think it should be quite a seamless entry, or re-entry should I say. Ocon, he's got the benefit of momentum on his side. He had a really impressive run-in last season. Obviously included his first podium in Sakir. However, the question I have is whether he'll be able to use that momentum to his benefit to be a thorn in Fernando's side this season. He's a great driver when on form, but he needs to find that consistency he once had in his Force India / Racing Point days in order to give Alpine a bit of a headache for 2022 when it comes to their driver lineup. I think overall, however, they've got a solid lineup, and I think they should do well if the car's up to scratch.
I have also gone with Alpine in 6th. I think that their lineup with Ocon and Alonso, while being very talented, has that potential to implode on itself and could be disastrous. Alonso, we know, can be a toxic driver. Countless reports across his Formula One career, especially in his last stint at McLaren. I think that if Renault don't play their cards right with him, it could be a really bad relationship. With Ocon, I think that he has the momentum on his side. He can be sometimes hit and miss, but coming back to the sport after a year out when you've done nothing, compared to Alonso, who's got a couple of races, not a couple of races, a couple of years actually, racing other types of high downforce machinery, it's a lot different. I think Alonso will probably perform not straight out the blocks. I think it'll take him a couple of races just to get back into the swing of F1, but he's had a lot of testing, which is obviously a massive thing for any driver coming back into F1. It's, as Taylor said, difficult to really try and put the Alpine team somewhere. He went for Aston Martin. I can see why he went for Aston Martin. I've gone for Alpine just because I think, as you'll find out, I have different reasons.
In 6th, I also have Alpine. I think with this team, there's a lot of unknowns. As you say, with both drivers, are we going to get the Ocon that we had for the last 2 rounds? If you look at a graph of his performance compared to Ricciardo's, he was just getting stronger and stronger as we got towards the end of the year. And if he does bring that version of himself that we know he has from 2017 and 2018, then I think he can be a really good asset for the Alpine team, because he was slightly underwhelming last year. He did have some reliability issues as well, but he was a bit underwhelming. And with Alonso as well, which version of Alonso are we going to get? Are we going to get the slightly sour grapes, toxic Alonso we got when he retired in 2018? Are we going to get the slightly more rejuvenated sort of Ferrari days Fernando? I mean, we know just look at Baku 2018, he will drive anything as long as it's still moving, and he will absolutely take it to the very limit of what he can do. You've just got to hope he doesn't destroy another teammate like he's done with so many that he's left in his wake, really, apart from Lewis Hamilton. And yeah, I think as Taylor mentioned with Aston Martin, I think again on a good day they're going to have it's a really strong pairing, but on a bad day they're reasonably weak. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what Alpine can do, and they really need to manage Alonso, which is going to be hard to do because he is his own self. He's not like a young driver who can be nurtured. He has his own way of doing things, and it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that dynamic. But we move on to 5th place. Taylor, who do you have?
So for 5th, I've chosen the rebranded Alpine outfit. Unlike you guys, I've ranked them 1 place higher. As I said before, I genuinely can't split Alpine and Aston Martin's driver lineups at all. So if we could place them in a joint rank ahead of the season, I would probably do that. I actually think Alpine might have the most underrated lineup on the grid. Alonso, even if he understandably won't be at his peak and he's 39 years old, he will always hustle an F1 car to strong results. And I think he will do what he can with the machinery he's got. We've seen that plenty of times at Ferrari and his second in the McLaren. He's an absolute phenomenon with any machine he's given. And then on Ocon, he's become criminally underrated due to last season and the fact that Ricciardo thrashed him. Remember, this is a young driver who thrashed the highly rated Sergio Perez over 1 lap in their 2 years as teammates. And his development was going really well until the situation where, unfortunately, Ricciardo went to Renault and he was left without a seat for 2019. And people underestimate the effect of sitting out. And it was always going to take time for Ocon to rediscover his best form, especially up against someone like Daniel Ricciardo, who we all know is a world-class performer. And we did see towards the end of the season, as Joel pointed out, that Ocon was starting to get back on his pace and he outqualified Ricciardo in 2 of the final 3 races. That being said, I think in both those races he outqualified Ricciardo. Within a matter of laps at the start of the race, he was being told to let Ricciardo go, which does show his race pace is still lacking. And up against someone like Alonso, who has been known to be elite on a Sunday, he could have some troubles there. That being said, if Ocon does not get at least close to Alonso's level, if not matching him, considering remember, Alonso is in the same predicament Ocon was in at the start of last year. So if Ocon is not able to do what Ricardo, not even what Ricardo did, but if he's not able to get close to Alonso, it'll probably spell the end for Ocon at Alpine, and there'll be plenty of suitors lining up for that seat if it did become vacant.
For fifth, I've got Aston Martin. Now, obviously, I know you've put them in sixth, but I'm going to go and put them in fifth. I've seen a lot of people hyping up this Aston Martin lineup, and it's quite understandable, really. But I've still got my reservations on the true ability of the two drivers driving for them. Obviously, Vettel is a world-class driver, and he's the only driver outside of the Mercedes outfit to give Lewis Hamilton a run for his money. The concern stems from last season, which was plagued with rookie-like errors and was arguably his worst season in F1 to date. Whether he can bounce back remains to be seen. He's a class driver, obviously, unquestionably, but it's whether he can recapture the form of his early successes at Red Bull. Last year, on the other side of the garage, it was a big improvement from Lance Stroll. He was beginning to find his form before he was forced to withdraw from the Eiffel Grand Prix due to illness, and obviously the further COVID diagnosis that he revealed before the Portuguese Grand Prix. Following that, he had a really horrid run of form before staggeringly taking a pole position in Turkey. I think overall, Stroll's a bit of an odd driver in terms of his ability. I mean, on some days, like Istanbul, he can be rapid, dare I say untouchable, but on others, he can just be absolutely nowhere. As you said in Abu Dhabi last season, you wouldn't be able to tell if he was even racing. This major inconsistency that he has in results, it really needs to be ironed out, because if Vettel's on form, Vettel's not going to let that sort of slide, and it's going to be quite embarrassing for him if he doesn't sort it out. It's his fifth season in F1, so the excuse of being inexperienced has long expired. But overall, I'd say it's a good lineup, but there's still some question marks for me.
For me, I've also put Aston Martin ahead of Alpine. I think when you look at their lineup, if it was a wet season all the way through, I think this lineup probably wins the Constructors' Championship. But obviously, it's not wet every single race. When you look at Vettel, he is, as Joel said, a class driver. He's bouncing back after his worst season he's had in Formula One. Yet he still was able on his day to put in stellar drives and lead the team in terms of a strategical aspect. I think that he's a very valuable addition to the Aston Martin lineup to replace Perez. It's a very, very good bit of business from Aston Martin. On the other side of the garage, you've got Stroll, who, we all know that Stroll is inconsistent, but I think a context needs to be applied a little bit to his last season. At the start of the season, he was very, very good. He unfortunately had that mechanical issue at the start of the Austrian Grand Prix, which forced him to retire from a points position very early on in the race. Across the rest of the season, he was stellar at places like Hungary, Mugello before his tyre failure, Turkey before the track sort of dried up and his tyres grained. I think that while he has the inconsistencies on race days, I think that last year people judged him a bit too harshly because they didn't fully know what had actually happened. The run of form after the Eiffel Grand Prix from him, he had 3 incidents, 2 of them which weren't his fault, and then he had 2 which you can say were his fault. Portimao, he was on a storming charge, but then did that questionable move on Lando Norris, at turn 1. He's a mixed bag. I want to see him perform, because if he performs this season, Aston Martin could really be one to watch. But I just think because there's that chance of him not performing, it's just lower down on the grid.
I'm once again agreeing with Joe and Nat here. I've also got Alpine in 5th. As you guys mentioned, Vettel is a world-class driver. On his day, he is, he can match Hamilton. And if you put Vettel in his familiar experience or atmosphere, I should say, he's going to be in a team leader. He's going to be in a much lower pressure environment, back with a British team as well. They're just they've got that sort of culture that he really obviously gelled with at Red Bull. And I think if he takes to it and he likes it, I think his confidence is going to go back up, and we're going to see the Vettel of a few years ago. And with Stroll, I'm going to have to back my boy here. I also think he had tons of unreliability and bad luck last year as well. Once he got on that bad form, he just could not turn it around, and things were getting out of control. He had that, as we said, he's that really strong performance in Mugello after the podium in Italy. He had that really strong performance in Mugello. He got the tyre failure, and then we go to Russia, and he's biffed off by Leclerc on lap 1, and then we go to Nürburgring, I think, and he's got, or Imola, I can't remember, but he gets involved in a crash, and then he just cannot find his footing again, and then he bounces back in Turkey, and then it was just all a bit of a mess at the end of the season. But he has proven he can, on his day, he is a top driver, and with Vettel as his teammate, I think he is just a great person to learn from. I think he's also got much more respect for Vettel than maybe Perez as well, because I think, there was always a bit of a sort of a rivalry with him and Perez. He's obviously bought the team, and there was just that. I just feel like there was always just that little bit of friction between them. But with Vettel, I think they're going to get on really well. We've already seen images from a sponsor; they seem to be getting on fine, and I think as if the Aston Martin car is as good as it could be with the Mercedes bits and the progression because it was the third quickest car last year, that could be that they could be a clear third. Obviously, if Ferrari, they don't know what they're going to do yet, but they could be a top midfield outfit and could get that third or fourth place in the constructors. But for now, they're fifth in my ranking. We're going to go to fourth now. Taylor, who do you have?
So in fourth, I don't think I'll be alone in this one. But I've placed McLaren. There's certainly plenty of expectations surrounding this lineup of Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, both on track and off the track. Lando Norris is certainly a talent. He draws criticism from a lot of quarters, but I think people forget how young he is. He's only 21, and in his opening 2 years in the sport, he's shown a lot of promise. He beat Sainz in qualifying in both years. And Sainz was a guy who stacked up quite well against Max Verstappen. So although I don't place Norris on the same talent level as Verstappen, Leclerc, or Russell, that's certainly not a bad thing. We've seen plenty of drivers like the talent of others, but they win titles because of particular circumstances, and Norris could well do the same. Speaking of Jenson Button, perhaps wasn't the most. He was definitely talented, but he was no Lewis Hamilton or anything like that, and he was able to win a title in the right circumstance. So Norris could easily do the same. Norris's main issue he has to iron out is his inconsistency. It's to be expected in any young driver. We've seen that with Stroll, as I mentioned before. But the way he dropped off from the first half to the last part of the season, last season, was quite dramatic. So he'll be looking to iron that out. And there's nobody better to learn from than an experienced race winner in Ricciardo. 2020 was a big season for Ricciardo in the sense that he cemented himself as one of the best on the grid. I don't think many people doubted it anyway. But his 2019, his first year at Renault, was rather erratic, and it did feature a lot of uncharacteristic errors. I'm looking at Baku when he reversed into the back of Kvyat after they tangled. And then Brazil, when usually so good on the brake pedal, he slammed straight into the side of Magnussen. But yeah, 2020, he was back to his brilliant best. It was probably his best season since 2014. 2 podiums, Renault's first podium since they returned to the sport full time. And overall, he was just absolutely brilliant throughout the year. But despite all the positives to Ricciardo, and I do think the Ricciardo-Norris relationship will be great for McLaren, it will kind of carry on from the Sainz-Norris dynamic. Ricciardo, for me, lacks that something extra that the lead drivers in the 3 teams I've listed above have. For me, Ricciardo's in that kind of... He's in no man's land when you rank him as a driver. So you've got Hamilton, Leclerc, Verstappen as like the elite bracket. And I don't think Ricciardo's on that level. And I also think he's another level above the likes of Perez and Sainz and co. We saw in 2018 and towards the end of the year, although Ricciardo had a lot of bad reliability issues in qualifying, he was regularly getting beaten by Max. And that's why I said at the time, actually, that the Ricciardo move to Renault was a masterstroke in the sense that although he probably won't win anything, and so it transpired, he didn't win a race or a title as expected in his 2 years there, he rebuilt his reputation. And alongside Max, although Ricciardo can certainly hold his own, his reputation was only going to go down the gutter because Max is only getting stronger and stronger. Whereas at Renault, he's established himself as one of the best on the grid still, and now he's got his move to McLaren, where hopefully it could be a shot at a world title. Mercedes engines next year, or they probably might fall down the pecking order because James Key has said they haven't been able to implement it to the max. But for the future, from 2022 onwards, McLaren Mercedes could be a very, very good move for Ricciardo. And that's why I place McLaren as high as fourth, but no further.
I'm also going to join Taylor and put McLaren fourth. Now, I originally thought this was going to be quite controversial putting them so high. I thought McLaren might be further down other people's lists, but as it stands, it doesn't seem to be the case. Daniel Ricciardo, he's a massive coup for the team, and I'm confident he can help the team return to its former glory that we saw back in the 90s and 2000s. I think Lando Norris as well, he's improved year on year, and he's coming into his third season with a desire to finally beat a teammate in F1 for the first time. Although this is going to be a really mammoth task, having a teammate in Daniel Ricciardo. Ricciardo last season managed to get Renault their first podiums in F1 since rejoining in 2016. Obviously, he scored the podium finishes at Imola and Nürburgring. Norris as well, he scored his first podium in Austria with the opening round in quite dramatic circumstance. And during the season, he also managed to bring the fight to Carlos Sainz much better than what he did in 2019. I'd say overall, it's a really strong lineup. I think if they get it right, I think it could be a really long-term lineup as well for the coming years. But it obviously just depends on how well they really work together, which is, it's a bit unclear at the moment, but I'm pretty sure they'll work well together.
As Joel and Taylor have, I've also put McLaren as my next team. I think that the lineup is the best of the midfield if we don't count Ferrari. It depends on what Ferrari do. It has a perfect blend of talent, youth, and experience. You've got Ricciardo, who's in the prime of his career, performing at a higher level than he has done before, I think, in my opinion, against Norris, who's improving and is still a very solid driver. There's no doubt that Norris has the speed there. He just doesn't have that little bit of consistency. I think he's, compared to some of the drivers, he's a little bit more lucky, which can also play in his favour. As Taylor said, he could be that type of driver that sneaks a championship because of circumstance. I feel that Ricciardo is pretty much also a similar driver to that. I think that both of them were circumstantial title winners. I don't think they'd win it, out of a dominant season like a Hamilton 2015 or like a battle against, say, any if Leclerc Verstappen had a title fight, it would be a bit different than if Ricciardo was to win a title, I think, because of the quality of it. I think that Ricciardo is a very, very good addition for the team. It's no question how good he is. He's a very nice guy to work around as well. As word to the paddock, he just seems like a very good, very bubbly person in general, but a professional when it comes to getting down to the nitty-gritty part of F1. I think that Norris is going to learn from him a lot more than he learned from Sainz. It's going to be a mammoth task for him to beat him, but on the Norris front, I think he gets a bit of unjust hate and criticism from people because, his junior career is stellar, brilliant. There's not enough words really to describe how good his junior career was. He jumps into F1 with McLaren. It's a little bit of a no-risk type of thing because they'll also take on Sainz, who hadn't had the best of seasons. So it's a new leaf for them. And, he beat Sainz in qualifying over the course of the season, if I'm mistaken. And it was, I think, one race between them in the head-to-heads or something close like that. Very, very capable driver, just needs to focus on that inconsistency. And I think that if he does, this pairing is easily going to be best of the rest if the Mercedes engine is been implemented properly.
I'm sensing a theme here. I've also got McLaren in fourth, as you guys mentioned. Ricciardo, very, very strong driver, and he's established now as well. We knew he could do it in the top team. We now know he's still got that level of performance with a midfield team. He really drove Renault forward. And with Norris, as you guys mentioned, he's getting better all the time. Lap 1 is still a bit of an issue, but I feel like he did fix that a little bit last year. Qualifying, we know he's good at qualifying, as he ran Sainz close pretty much every time. It should be a good dynamic, but I feel like as we mentioned with Alpine and Aston Martin, there's quite a lot of unknowns there. I feel like with McLaren, there's a lot of certainty there. We pretty much know what they're going to bring to the party. We know how they're going to get on. They're good friends, or recently good friends when they were different teams now at the same team, and the media and PR people are going to love that. It's a bit of a cringe fest, if I'm honest, like that launch video with the song. I mean, that was hard to watch. And I've got a bit of a weird vibe as well with maybe Ricciardo has more to prove, and Norris is hungry to prove he can beat the teammate he's been beaten by Sainz on points for the last 2 years. I feel like there might be a bit of friction there. There might be something that I might just be making that up, but I feel like everyone, 99% of people are like, oh yeah, it's really good fun. They're all making jokes. Yeah, good banter. Haha, it's all going to be really cheery, blah, 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 blah. I just feel like there is a flip side of that. Ricciardo has, I think, said some comments about, it's serious business. He's here to win, and they might not win a race, but that's the mentality he's bringing. And I feel like people have got carried away a bit with this pairing. I mean, that being said, I think they'll get on fine, and it'll probably be no dramas at all. But I just do feel like there is a tiny side, or a reality where this does happen, and it's not going to be a horrible dynamic, and like a Rosberg Hamilton, but just a little bit of friction there, just something to. Because they're both super motivated, I think, and they're both very determined to win. But I think with that package, yeah, they're in fourth for me. And now, Taylor, who have you got in third?
So, rather controversially, in third place, I've got Mercedes. It might seem baffling to place a lineup that has been responsible for four consecutive title doubles, only third, and especially a team boasting a 7-time world champion and the most successful man in the sport's history as their lead driver. But if we're judging our rankings on recent form, then I'm afraid Valtteri Bottas brings Mercedes down a lot for me, because his 2020 season was simply put woeful. We're talking about someone that finished 124 points behind in a concise 17-round calendar, and that included his teammate missing an entire weekend too. Someone that only managed to win a total of 2 races in one of the most dominant machines of all time. That is the same number as Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, and the same number as Gasly and Perez in midfield cars combined. The argument in favour of Bottas and his reasons for staying at Mercedes is largely that he delivers the points Mercedes need him to. But for me, that argument simply doesn't wash anymore on the evidence of 2020. Last season, Mercedes could have won the Constructors' Championship through Hamilton's points alone. And if you think back, when they faced their biggest challenge to the dominance in 2018, he ended up finishing the championship down in 5th, behind a Red Bull. Red Bull were consistently the 3rd quickest car in 2018, and nowhere near a match for Mercedes, who, for the last quarter of the year, actually had the outright fastest car after a season-long challenge with Ferrari previously. He also doesn't even pick up the pieces when Hamilton has a rare off day. Like at Monza, granted it wasn't Hamilton's fault, but Hamilton picks up a penalty. He was sent to the back of the grid. It was a huge chance for Bottas to close the gap in the championship. And instead of actually making an impression, he failed to overtake a single car while Hamilton climbed from the back of the grid up to, I think, 8th and finished 2 places behind. And then we had the fiasco at Sakhir, where in the absence of Hamilton due to COVID, he had the chance to prove he can lead the team for once. Instead, what did Bottas do? He got outshone by George Russell in a car that he had never driven before, and he was not even optimized to fit in. And that, to me, just proved that although Russell's a great talent, most drivers on the grid could probably, bar a few, could probably do what Bottas does on a consistent basis. So while Hamilton remains the benchmark in F1, we are discussing driver lineups as a whole, and like with Williams, their second driver does bring it down a lot, because Vettel did enough to win the constructor title for Red Bull, and it's only 2013. And if we're doing this video now, ahead of 2014, or if we're doing that video based on the 2013 lineups, I wouldn't have suggested Red Bull have the best lineup on the grid, because despite Vettel's brilliance that year, it was a sizable indication of how poor Webber was. And it's the same case here. Hamilton's brilliant. He's the best on the grid still for me by far. But at the same time, Bottas was an absolute shambles last year. And I actually think he's regressed at Mercedes. 2017, you saw he would actually pick up the scraps. So if you're looking at Russia, Austria, Hamilton had an off day on both those occasions. And who denied Ferrari and Vettel the win in the championship race? Bottas. But he's no longer doing that. And I think mentally, although he won't like to admit it, I think he's been destroyed by the constant beatings by Hamilton. And for the sake of his career, it probably would be ideal for him to have a fresh start elsewhere. Obviously, he's not going to want to leave the team that can offer him the chance, or however slender it is, to fight for the championship each year. But I think while Bottas at Mercedes has been a shadow of the man we saw at Williams, I think if he got a move elsewhere, we actually would start to see signs of the old Bottas. But yeah, in terms of ranking the driver lineups, that's why I've put Mercedes third, because in terms of Bottas, I think he drags down Hamilton quite a bit, and there are two better overall lineups in the sport for me.
I've gone for Ferrari. Now, I think the top three, my top three are really closely matched. I was really, I was constantly debating which way or which order to put them. But I've ended up doing it in this order, so in third is Ferrari. The lineup for this season, it's really impressive, I reckon. I mean, obviously, for a start, you've got Charles Leclerc, who's a generational talent, I'd say, who's arguably the quickest driver on the grid over a single lap. He has strong leadership traits, which will help the team recover from their abysmal 2020 campaign. There's still some areas of his racecraft that needs to be ironed out, but Ferrari should be thankful that they got a driver so talented in their possession. Now, moving on to Sainz, I saw many people criticise Ferrari when they initially announced Sainz, saying, "Oh, they should have gone for Ricciardo, they should have gone for this, should have gone for that." But I originally thought it was actually a really good deal by the team. He's gained the nickname Smooth Operator for a reason, and that reason is because he's a very consistent driver, a skill he's harnessed during his 2 seasons at McLaren. I think him and Leclerc will prove to be a really, really strong lineup in the coming years, and it's going to be a really nice dynamic between the two. But people should not be fooled into believing that Sainz is coming there to, sit and be Leclerc's lapdog. I think Sainz is going to go in at Leclerc and really try and beat him. I think it's going to be quite an exciting bout to see in the coming years, but overall, I'd say it's a really strong lineup for the team, and hopefully it's the lineup that brings them back to success.
For me, my third best pairing, I've gone with Red Bull. Now, I've gone for Red Bull because personally, I think that while the lineup is very, very good, I just think that Verstappen compared to a talent like Leclerc is just a little tiny, talk about margins, it's just a little bit lower in my mind. I think that Leclerc he's quicker. I think Leclerc is a bit more consistent. I think he's a bit less hot-headed. I'm talking like the slimmest of margins possible. They're so close, but I think Leclerc just edges it. Now, on the other side of the garage, Red Bull have Perez, who is off the back of his best season in Formula 1. I think we can agree on that. He won his first race. He was absolutely mega from when he came back from COVID. Absolutely stunning drives from him across the season. I think that he'll carry that momentum through to this season, but I'm also a bit wary, and I've put him a bit low. I put them behind Ferrari because of the fact that I think his last stint could be a danger. His last stint at a top team could be a danger sign. I'm not going to say it's going to be exactly the same as what happened in McLaren in 2013 because a lot of variables affected that. But I just think there is that slim chance that if it does go wrong, it will go wrong. And it's not going to be, okay, whatever, he's still P6. I think that there's a chance that he could maybe cost the team some money. And when a car or driver costs the team money, it's usually not a small amount. I think that it is a very good pairing, nonetheless, and a very talented one, but it's just a little bit lower than what people are expecting.
In third for me, I have Ferrari. I think Leclerc, definitely top 3 drivers on the grid. Last year, he drove that Ferrari way outside of where it should have been. And he got, let's not forget, he beat Norris in Austria in a car quicker than him. And it barely gets mentioned. We have all the Scenario 7 stuff, but we don't have anything about Leclerc, who was third on track and second after Hamilton's penalty. And then again in Austria, he picked up the pieces. In Britain, he picked up the pieces after all the tyre failures. And then he did bottle a little bit the podium in Turkey. But again, he had that pace. And I think with a car beneath him that he can fight, and maybe an illegal engine like he showed in 2019, he had the most poles that year. So I think the pace is unquestionable, and now we're seeing it in the races. he's like Joel said, he's still making a few mistakes here and there, which you'd like to see ironed out. But the raw speed is unquestionable, and if he does get a slightly better engine and a better car, there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to be challenging for podiums regularly. And with Sainz, his last 2 seasons with McLaren have been really strong. He's got that promotion, if you will, into a better team, into a Ferrari. And we've already seen him in Mugello. We've seen him testing out the 2018 Ferrari. And for me, it's a really good fit for him. I think he'll get on with Leclerc fine. He's not a number 2 driver on paper. I think he'll just naturally fit in behind Leclerc, which is what Ferrari want. But I still think he'll be able to hold his own. And I'm really excited to see how this pair get on as well, because I think it is a very strong pairing. And if Ferrari do get that act together, I think it is very exciting. And to think this is probably their youngest lineup in a very, very, very long time.
It's their youngest 2-driver lineup ever, I believe.
Right, exactly. So it's their youngest lineup ever, and I just think that youth but they might be young, but Sainz has been in the sport since 2015. I mean, he's got a lot of experience, and Leclerc obviously has got that huge Ferrari contract. That was it 2023, 24. So I think it's a really good pairing, and I think they'll do well this year. And we're going to move on to second now. Taylor, who do you have?
So following on from you, Tom, I have gone for Ferrari in second. It was very close between them and my first place, but I am going to go for Ferrari in second on the basis that I think both of their drivers are marginally worse, if that's the correct word to use, than the drivers I've got in the first place. I completely agree with Joel. I think Leclerc on raw speed might be the quickest guy in F1. You don't, regardless of the engine fiasco in 2019, you don't get the most poles in one season unless you are absolutely rapid. And he is the only man on the grid to have a 100% record against teammates, which is no light seeing when you consider your teammate for the past 2 years has been a 4-time world champion. Regardless of Vettel's struggles, they were inflicted by Leclerc himself. Leclerc put the pressure on Vettel in 2019, and Vettel had no response to that. And what Leclerc did with the SF1000 was bordering on miraculous. The fact he got 2 podiums so early on in the season. And that, for me, the highlight of his season was actually that qualifying lap for the Sakir Grand Prix. He went out and set a lap that was quicker than both Mercedes, second on the grid provisionally, and ended up in 4th. But the fact that he didn't even go out for another run is just shaded of 2013 Vettel at Singapore. That type of arrogance of knowing how good that lap was, that you couldn't get anything more out of it. And going back a bit further in his career, I actually think he masked Alfa Romeo in a sense that 2018 car, the Alfa Romeo, was a solid car, but Leclerc towards the end of the year did drag it to some exceptional results. And the dynamic with Sainz will be interesting to see, because Ferrari do have a history of being poor at managing 2 equally competitive drivers. I don't envisage Sainz being that much of a threat to Leclerc in regard to, I think Sainz is a level or 2 below that. I classify Leclerc as in the top 3 along with Hamilton and Verstappen, whereas Sainz in that kind of Perez midfield category just below Ricciardo. Leclerc, I don't believe he's on the level of Verstappen right now in terms of consistency. I think Verstappen in 2020 he matured a lot, whereas Leclerc still had a few niggling issues in his armory, like the Styrian Grand Prix when he went into the back of Vettel, kind of needless, and then he had a few other skirmishes along the way. But right now we are basing it on what we know, and Sainz has been brilliant for 2 consecutive seasons at McLaren. And from that, it's substantial evidence to suggest he will be a solid enough number 2 for the Scuderia, as Tom said. On paper, he won't be a number 2. He'll come into the team as an equal, but he will just naturally slot in behind Leclerc when I'd imagine Leclerc does kind of outline himself as the quicker of the 2. But I believe Sainz will also kind of be accommodating for that role, whereas Vettel, as a 4-time world champion and who did come to the team as the established number 1 figure, he would have been less likely to accept that, whereas Sainz, I think, will be more understanding. And he's a very smart son. He might not be the quickest on a Saturday. He did match Verstappen, and maybe it's kind of underplaying how good Norris is over 1 lap, but when you consider how good Leclerc is, I think Sainz will struggle on a Saturday, but Sainz is a very smart Sunday racer who will quietly pick up results. And I think one of the most impressive things about Sainz actually is the stuff he does away from the track. We saw from Drive to Survive how he kind of threw himself into the McLaren project, which at a time McLaren were flailing. They needed someone to lead that team. And for him to do that at such a young age was really impressive. And with Ferrari fielding their youngest ever driver pairing, he could do exactly the same in Maranello. My one fear with Sainz is that he could be a bit like a Gasly in a top team. Not in the sense that he will underperform as much as Gasly, but in terms of they only operate to their maximum when they find themselves in an environment they feel comfortable. So with Gasly, we see that he performs well at Toro Rosso or AlphaTauri because that is an environment he excels in, he feels comfortable. Sainz at Renault was very dubious. He got convincingly beaten by Hulkenberg, who is obviously no slouch, but he's not an elite level driver. So was the McLaren a flash in the pan where Sainz felt confident? And will the Ferrari dream fail to materialize? That remains to be seen, but on paper, it looks a fabulous lineup and could be a good long-term fit for the Scuderia.
So, following on from Taylor, I've actually put Mercedes in second. Now, this one will likely raise some eyebrows, understandably. In fact, I was close to putting Ferrari over Mercedes, but I think it's Hamilton's unquestionable ability, and he's an all-time great. Pretty much comfortably puts them in second. But my reasoning for really putting Mercedes second is mostly down to the fact of his teammate, who is Valtteri Bottas. I mean, Bottas can be an exceptionally quick driver on a Saturday, but his performances on a Sunday leave a lot to be desired, not to mention his very questionable racecraft as well. He's a good driver, but he's nothing more than that personally. Although the relationship between him and Lewis is quite strong, Hamilton's sheer excellence pretty much carries Mercedes to second on the list. Obviously, Bottas as well. We saw him at Williams back in 2014, 2015, and how great of a driver he was. So there wasn't really many complaints when he originally got the Mercedes seat in 2017. But it's the way he seems to, as you said before, Taylor, he seems to have sort of stagnated or regressed, if anything. He doesn't seem to be the Bottas that we got excited about seeing in the Mercedes back in 2017. He seems to be just a bit of a joke now, really. He's just not that good anymore. So if maybe leaving in the future is possibly good for his career, but I don't think he'll do that because it's Mercedes, and I think leaving Mercedes, given their current form right now, is a bit stupid.
So for second, I have gone for Ferrari. I think it's incredibly marginal between them and Red Bull. I've put them ahead because personally, I think that Leclerc is just a tiny bit better, as I mentioned, compared to Max Verstappen. Both of them are elite level talents. We cannot forget this. I'm not saying that Verstappen is some mug that they picked off the street. I think he is an incredible generational driver. I don't like using that term, but that's what he is, But Leclerc, I think he's just a little bit better. I think Sainz is only improving. He's still yet to hit his peak compared to Perez, who's in his peak. But I think that, obviously, as I said, Perez has that little potential to fail and falter. I think that Sainz, though, will fit in with the team perfectly. He's seems like a really good guy to work with. He's focused, but he can also be friendly. Putting him alongside Leclerc is a very, very good decision because he will, if he has to, he can act as a rear gunner if he has to. Ferrari, I'm pretty sure, have said that he's not going to be like a hierarchical number two, and it's not a contractual number two agreement between them. They're on equal status. I think that Leclerc's going to beat him, but I think it's going to be a very good battle between them, especially on race days, because both of them are very, very capable over a full race distance.
In second for me, I have Mercedes. I think Hamilton, he is the best driver on the grid for me, and he's the reason why Mercedes are even this high up. If we average out the two drivers, I think there's not a lot that needs to be said, really. We know everything about Hamilton. He's a 7-time world champion, statistically the best driver in the history of F1. And yeah, I mean, there's not an awful lot to say about him. Bottas, on the other hand, where do we start with this guy? I mean, he is just what a boring person this
I think
guy
I said
is.
it all.
Yeah, I mean, he's just he's just. I mean, I called Giovinazzi average. This guy is literally average. I mean, it's just he's just so dull. I mean, if you're a Valtteri Bottas fan out there, I mean, what are you doing with your life? Seriously, I mean, you must have something better to do. He's just,
Some
I mean,
angry man in a
just
shed in Finland is not happy, man.
yeah. Well, I
Very
don't
much.
care. I mean, just look at Italy. Like Taylor said, look at Italy. I mean, what is he doing? He's firstly completely harpooned himself into turn one on the warm-up laps to the grid and destroyed his floor. He's then spent lap one getting overtaken by a guy who can't overtake, and then he goes wide and gets overtaken by two more cars. He then spends the whole race moaning about engine settings and can't overtake. And when neither Red Bull have turned up and Hamilton has turned up, he's let three midfield drivers onto the podium. I mean, Turkey, I mean, Jesus Christ. How is this guy still in the top team? He's spun, what, 6 times? I mean,
7.
Yep.
7. It's just embarrassing, honestly. And
Got
it
lapped
was
as
even
well.
worse. It
Mm.
was even worse. We go to Sakir. Oh, he's got pole. Yeah, well done. Oh, wait, no, you've been overtaken by a guy who can't even put the brake pedal all the way down because his feet don't fit in the cockpit. I mean, oh, just just get him out, man. Seriously. What a joke this guy is. And he's the reason why, I mean, like Tedder said, Mercedes could have finished first without Bottas's points. And even whenever he's behind Hamilton, I don't think ever I've gone, yeah, he can win this race. Whenever he's in front, you go, yeah, Hamilton's going to get past him. I mean,
That's the
look at
difference with
Nürburgring.
Rosberg. Definitely.
Yeah,
That's the main difference with Rosberg.
yeah. With Rosberg, you go Rosberg. He can pull his quali lap out of the bag. He can, and Bottas can pull out a quali lap, and he does it
But not
sometimes. But when
consistently.
not consistent, and when the pressure is on, Rosberg delivered, and he could get the main difference. I think actually is he could get under Hamilton's skin. Hamilton
Mm.
does not care at all about Bottas. He's just like, oh yeah, and he's so complimentary in interviews. Just like, oh yeah, this guy pushed me so hard today. Got to give it, working for half of the team. And he's just saying that because he knows he's never going to challenge him, and he likes having him there. And I think that's they get on pretty well because Hamilton just does not see him as a challenge whatsoever. I mean, yeah, look, Nürburgring. Okay, oh, he's in the lead. Oh, he actually put up a fight at turn one. That's really good. No, let's just forget how to brake and then just go deep into into turn one and completely destroy his tires.
Mm.
So, I mean, yeah,
I think it
mean,
says a lot the fact that the overtake for the lead wasn't even broadcast on TV because it was that unexpected. His misdemeanor into turn one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and remember
wasn't even an
Silverstone
overtake, it was-
2019 where they just cut to the crowd because they didn't think Bottas would get back past. So I mean, yeah,
even the TV directors do not rate this guy.
yeah. I think the Bottas slander can stop for now. We'll move on to our number ones. Taylor, who do you have?
In first place on my driver pairing ranking for the 2021 Formula One season, I have gone with Red Bull. Starting with the new man at the helm, I think everybody was delighted that Sergio Perez got his second chance in a top team. It's been a long time coming, and it would have been an absolute travesty if he was forced out of the sport after the season he had last time around. In particular, that second half of the season he enjoyed was absolutely phenomenal, one of the best on the grid, probably only behind Verstappen and Hamilton. He largely carried that Racing Point team when Stroll was having his many difficulties, and the dramatic win in Sakir made it a no-brainer for Horner and Marko if it was not already before that. And the fact that Red Bull decided to go outside their driver academy for only the second time in their history speaks volumes about how good Perez was. It remains to be seen whether he can be the driver to finally solve Red Bull's second seat dilemma, because that has been looming over them since Ricciardo exited at the end of 2018. Because they desperately needed that second driver to support Verstappen in the fight against Mercedes, because otherwise it's just Verstappen fighting. For all the criticism we give of Bottas, he'll be thereabouts. Whereas Albon and Gasly, they were fighting midfield cars. At least with Bottas, he'll be there and he'll give Mercedes that strategical advantage. But what we do know, however, is that he will be up against the toughest challenge of his career so far. Aside from Hamilton, going up against Max Verstappen is probably the hardest teammate you could face in equal machinery right now. To boast the stats Verstappen does at his age, only 23, is frightening. He's already racked up 119 Grand Prix starts, 10 wins, which doesn't sound that impressive, but when you consider we're in the midst of the Mercedes era, and that's more than Bottas as well in pretty much the same time period, it's an impressive tide to hit double-digit wins in this era. and he's also got 42 podiums. I'll be very surprised if Verstappen does not retire at the end of his career with the most podiums in Formula One, because I can see this guy going on until late 30s, and with F1 only increasing the amount of races each season, if he gets into a dominant car, the numbers he could rack up could be nothing like we've seen before. He was near enough faultless last season, Verstappen. He's eradicated most of the costly errors he was making, and he's really starting to become the complete package, which is a scary thought for the competition. And although his speed was evident from the moment he set foot in an F1 car, in 2019 and most notably last season, he did start to prove his consistency. And I think now, he's even at 23, he's at that stage where he's ready to challenge for the title. That's the next stage of his development. And for him, he's done everything he can. He's now reliant on Perez to be that step up from Albon and provide him with support against Mercedes, and for Red Bull to finally deliver the machinery for them to battle Mercedes from the beginning of the year. I think those who think Perez will match Verstappen or give him a close run for his money or being a tad optimistic. I don't think Perez, he's never been a Saturday man, whereas Verstappen is complete on both a Saturday and a Sunday. So I think on a Saturday, although he'll do better than Albon, I think Perez will still struggle in that regard. But on a Sunday, I can see Perez definitely making it a four-way scrap up front, and that duo will complement each other nicely, and that's why it's my best driver pairing on the grid.
Like Taylor, I've also got Red Bull top of my list. I think this lineup is unbelievably strong and probably their best since Ricciardo left by a mile. Verstappen's finally beginning to mature and, become the complete package. I think now it's only down to Red Bull, as you said. It's only down to Red Bull and Perez being able to give him what they can to help him to secure his first World Championship. Perez is a really good coupe for Red Bull. I think it would have, as you said, it would have been an absolute horror show if Perez left and Albon somehow managed to keep a seat in F1. Although take a bit of time for him to get up to speed with the Red Bull and all the new machinery and the Honda engine and so on, I'm confident that when he does find his feet at Red Bull, I think he's going to be a really, really good driver for them. He's not going to be anywhere near the likes of Verstappen, but he'll be able to be a good deputy and be able to provide them the support in the strategical areas where Red Bull have kind of struggled because Albon and Gasly have been too busy battling, Robert Kubica for like P18 or whatever. Bit exaggerated, but whatever. I think overall, this is probably the best lineup on the grid. It seems like a really complete package, and it'd be quite a shame if we don't see both drivers securing wins this season. I'd be quite surprised, in fact.
For me, as you probably have seen with everyone else's opinions, I've gone against everyone. Mercedes, I think, is the best lineup on the grid. I think we slander Bottas, and I slander him too. I don't want him in that seat because I think he's wasting it. But when you look at the actual relationship he has with Lewis, it's perfect because Lewis obviously doesn't see him as a challenger. Bottas thinks he is, which then tries to push him a bit to a higher level. But while he might not be there on the days when he really needs to be there and he can have some absolute stinkers and absolute honkers, he can sometimes have that spark and he can still help Mercedes achieve results. While in 2020, he had arguably, I think, his worst year, bar 2018. I think it's out of those two for his worst year at Mercedes. I think, though, that with the dynamic they've got at the team, it's a perfect type of lineup there. Onto the other side of the garage, you have, the man that's rewriting history. He's arguably in the top 2 of best drivers of all time. He's continuously improving every area he can. He's meticulous, he is relentless, he is consistent, he is smooth. He's just the best driver on the grid. He is the best driver of this era. I think no matter who you have next to him in that car, having Hamilton automatically makes it top 2 just because of what he can bring to the team.
And number 1 for me, I have Red Bull. Like you, Taylor and Joel, I think Verstappen, very, very close to being the best driver on the grid. He's just behind Hamilton. and we saw him ironing out those mistakes. You look back to 18, where he was basically crashing every weekend. I think he's matured. He's matured from 2019. Like you say, Taylor, as well. He's got so many races under his belt at a young age, and he took on that team leader role really nicely, I think, last year, and the year before. And with a slightly more experienced teammate in Perez, I think it could be a nice dynamic. Unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but with Perez, there is still the unknown. I think it was you, Nat, said about his time at McLaren. I think that's very harsh. That was his third season in F1. McLaren were not a good place post McLaren, post Hamilton. It was just the wrong environment for him. He went up too quick. I mean, he bounced back straight away in 2014, and he showed the driver that he is, and shown the driver he is throughout those years at Force India, at Racing Point. And if he can translate what he did in 2020 with Racing Point to what he can do with Red Bull, I mean that is why they are my highest place, because I just think if Perez brings that level with him from the last couple of years, like you say, Taylor, he is going to be in that scrap, that top four scrap, that Albon and Gasly critically could not do. They could not get within 0.3 of Verstappen in quality, and while Perez might not do that, it's not going to be a disaster, because he is proven. With Albon and Gasly, they still weren't really proven, but we know what we're going to get with Perez. We know he is an absolute king with time management. The Force India Racing Point mechanics say that he has an inbuilt traction control. That's how good he is. He's just so good on those tires. He can make the strategies work. And if Red Bull put him on a slightly different strategy, he is the guy that can make it work and potentially snag a win away from Mercedes or get a really good podium. So I think he's there to disrupt the two Mercedes drivers. Like I was just saying, Albon and Gasly. I mean, Albon maybe once or twice got in that pit window, basically. That's all they're asking. Just get in a pit window, not languish 30 seconds behind or struggling to get past midfield drivers. That is honestly all they want, because they know Verstappen is their number one. He is their priority. They want to get him the World Championship. And no matter how good Perez is, that's not going to change. It's interesting to see how Perez will get on as a number two, because he has been a team leader for so long, really. I mean, well, I guess at Force India with Hulkenberg, he was sort of the but it's just interesting to see how he slots in with that dynamic. So I guess there's slightly more uncertainty than the other people I have in my top three, because it was close between Mercedes and Ferrari. I feel like Ferrari, you can kind of see how that dynamic's going to get on. With Mercedes, we know how that dynamic gets on, and we know how good Hamilton is. But with Red Bull, there's a slight tint of uncertainty. But when it all goes well, I think that's why I have them as my top team. And I think just saying that, I think it's making me even more excited to see what Perez can do. Can he get in front of a Bottas, or if Red Bull have the quickest car, can he can they get a 1-2? Basically, they only got a 1-2. Well, they didn't get a 1-2, did they, the last 2 years? But that's who I have them first. And I think we're just going to quickly go through all of our rankings to summarize, if you're on audio, so you can hear what our rankings are, not see them on the screen. Lovely graphics designed by Taylor. So, yep, Taylor, you want to give your rankings center first?
So my order of the F1 2021 season driver pairing rankings goes Haas, Williams, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, Aston Martin, Alpine, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and then at the top spot, Red Bull.
My rankings I've got down are 10th, I've got Haas, 9th, I've got Williams, 8th, I've got Alfa Romeo, 7th, I've got AlphaTauri, 6th, I've got Alpine, 5th, I've got Aston Martin, 4th, I've got McLaren, 3rd is Ferrari, 2nd is Mercedes, and my number 1 is Red Bull.
So my 10 rankings I have at the Bottom, in 10th, I have Haas. 9th, Williams. In 8th, there's Alfa Romeo. 7th, I've gone with Alpha Tauri. 6th is Alpine. 5, I've gone for Aston Martin. 4, McLaren. 3, Red Bull. 2nd, Ferrari. And the top dog, Mercedes.
Okay, so my rankings are: I've got Haas in 10th, Alfa Romeo, Williams, Alpha Tauri, Alpine, Aston Martin, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, and in first place, I have Red Bull. That has been our driver pairing rankings today from the podcast. If you've enjoyed it, give it a like. Make sure you subscribe. Also, leave us a comment if you're on YouTube or if you're on Spotify. Leave us a review. That'd be really helpful. Until next time, thank you for watching and see you later.